They said I was insane. But the only madness I ever knew was being born into a family that smiled to my face and stabbed me when I wasn't looking. My name is Amanda. And I lost everything, not because I was weak but because I trusted the wrong people with my truth. My mother and my brother didn't just betray me. They orchestrated a lie so deep, so cruel that it nearly destroyed me. They told the world I was mentally ill. They put me away so they could take control of my father's money. And while I screamed behind padded walls, they smiled in photographs, living off the wealth I was meant to inherit. But I didn't die in that hospital. I remembered everything. Every betrayal. Every smirk. Every lie. No. I'm back. It all began the day my father died. He was the only real light in my life. A quiet man, wise and careful, with a deep love for justice and for me, his only daughter. He wasn't rich when he started, but he built everything with his bare hands, from his small logistics company to the modest empire he left behind. He trusted me with it. In his will, he named me executor and primary beneficiary of the estate. Not out of favoritism, but because he said I had the sharpest mind, the cleanest hands. But to my mother and my brother Michael, that was unforgivable. You see, my mother had always resented the bond one had with my father. She once told me during an argument that I stole his love from her. And Michael, he was the kind of man who believed leadership was owed to him simply because he was the son. He never worked a day at Dad's company. He was entitled, reckless, and bitter. And when he found out I was in charge of the estate, I saw something in his eyes that chilled me. Pure calculation. At first, I didn't notice the cracks forming around me. I was grieving, busy handling funeral arrangements, reviewing documents, managing lawyers. But behind the scenes, they were already planting seeds. One afternoon, I noticed a strange withdrawal from one of the estate accounts. It wasn't much, just enough to raise a question. I brought it up to Michael. He waved it off and told me I must have misread the numbers. I checked again. It was real. When I pressed further, he suggested maybe I was too tired, too emotional. Grief messes with your head, he said. Then Mom chimed in. She said I needed rest. That I'd been too overwhelmed lately. That maybe I should talk to someone. The way she said it, soft with fake concern, made my skin crawl. They began to isolate me gradually. It started with subtle comments. You don't seem yourself. Then it turned into whispered phone calls. I'd walk into a room and conversations would end abruptly. My emails to the estate lawyer began bouncing back. Then one day I found my office at the company locked, and Michael sitting behind my father's desk. I'm stepping in temporarily, he said with a smug smile. Just until you get back on your feet. Back on my feet. I wasn't sick. I wasn't confused. I was being erased. I confronted my mother that night. I demanded answers. She didn't even flinch. You're not well, Amanda, she said as if reading from a script. We're doing what's best for you. That's when I knew. They planned it. And I was alone. A week later it happened. I remember waking up with my head pounding, my vision blurry. There were voices around me. Urgent, muffled, unfamiliar. Then the cold bite of restraints around my wrist. I was in a hospital room. Bright lights, sterile air. Panic swelled in my chest. A nurse approached me with a clipboard and a fake smile. You were brought in under a psychiatric hold. Your mother and brother said you've been exhibiting signs of severe paranoia and delusion. I screamed. I begged. I told them they were lying. But it didn't matter. They had already signed the papers. They had power of attorney. And the more I resisted, the worse I looked. The next few months were a haze of medication, forced therapy sessions, and humiliation. I was labeled with a disorder I didn't have. My every word was twisted, my every plea dismissed. The staff called me volatile. My mother visited once, to smile sweetly and tell me, it's for your own good. But I never forgot who I was. I kept track of the days. I watched. I listened. And I waited. Because one day the walls would open. One day they'd let me out. And when they did, I'd show them what insanity really looked like. When they wheeled me into that so-called care facility, I remember the smell first. It was sterile, cold, and distant, like the place had never known warmth. I wasn't mad. I wasn't unstable. But the way they looked at me, you'd think I was dangerous. I wanted to scream, but something inside me whispered to stay still. That maybe, just maybe, if I didn't fight, I'd find a way to survive this. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was planned. My mother signed the forms like she was donating me to charity. My brother, Noah, the one who used to chase monsters from under my bed, wouldn't even look me in the eye. He handed over my phone, my purse, everything that connected me to the outside world, and walked away. I asked to speak to someone, anyone. I begged them to call my lawyer. But the staff just nodded like they were used to this script. Like they'd seen women like me before. Paranoid. Delusional. Unstable. Except I wasn't. And I wasn't alone in my suspicion. One of the nurses, a woman named Trina, would later whisper when no one was looking, "You don't belong here, sweetie. I know what they're doing." I held on to those words like a lifeline. Back home, my parents and brother had full access to my estate. I had inherited my late grandfather's fortune. A man who trusted me with his legacy because he said I had his fire, not their greed. But greed has a way of changing people. It twists love into power plays and family into enemies. And while they told the world I was under treatment, they threw parties in my house, sold off my artwork, and filed court documents to assume permanent financial control of my assets. I found out later that my mother even told the courts I was schizophrenic and that I had attempted suicide. Something that never happened. They forged medical records, falsified reports, and paid off a psychiatrist to diagnose me after a 10-minute interview. 10 minutes. It was supposed to be a 3-week observation. But those 3 weeks stretched into months. I was forced to take medication that made me feel like I was floating outside of myself. Every day I wrote letters to my lawyer in my head. I planned escape routes I knew I'd never take. And I counted tiles, 143 from my bed to the hallway. Every single day. And yet, the worst part wasn't the drugs or the locked doors. It was knowing that the people I loved, the people I built my life around, didn't just leave me. They buried me. The twist came unexpectedly. Trina, the nurse with kind eyes, got reassigned to another wing. But before she left, she slid a folded note into my pillowcase. It read, "Your lawyer came looking for you. They told him you checked involuntarily. I don't believe it. You need to fight." That note became my heartbeat. My reason to hold on. The next day I refused my meds. I started documenting everything. I wrote down every name, every incident, every conversation. I did it all in my mind because they wouldn't even allow me a pen. I memorized dates, shift changes, even the codes they used at the doors. And when a court-appointed guardian came in for a routine checkup, I made sure to act completely normal. Sane. I told her things only Amanda would know. I even recited my old poetry to prove memory and coherence. I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. That was the beginning of the crack in their lies. My lawyer, bless his relentless heart, had grown suspicious. He tried contacting me for months and kept being turned away. So he filed an emergency appeal. He found inconsistencies in the mental health reports. He even discovered that my signature had been forged on commitment documents. The day the court ordered an independent evaluation, I cried harder than I ever had. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in months someone saw me. The real me. When that new psychiatrist sat down with me, I didn't beg or plead, I just told the truth. Calmly. Purry. I laid out every manipulation, every lie. And when I saw his eyes widen, when I saw him lean forward, taking notes with urgency, I knew it wasn't over. But it had begun. The evaluation was just the first domino. Within a week, the court ordered my release into a supervised home, away from the facility but still under observation. It wasn't freedom, but it was enough to breathe again. Enough to remember who I was. I stepped into the small apartment like someone returning from the dead. My hair was thinner, my skin pale, my voice shakier than I remembered. But I was home. My lawyer, Evan, met me there. He looked at me like someone seeing a ghost. "I'm sorry," he said. "They buried you so deep, Amanda. I had no idea." His words cracked something inside me. Not from pain but from relief. Someone finally said it out loud. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I had been buried, systematically erased by the people I loved most. And they weren't done. The next morning a letter arrived. From my mother. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. "We hope you can focus on your healing now," she wrote. "Let go of the past. If you try to stir things up, we'll pursue full conservatorship again for your own good." I could barely breathe reading it. This wasn't just greed, it was control. They wanted to own me, silence me, and they were willing to manipulate the system, twist my pain, and gaslight the world to do it. But they underestimated what surviving a facility like that does to a person. I wasn't scared anymore. I hired a forensic accountant. Quietly. He dug into every transaction that happened while I was locked away. My mother sold a Monet I had inherited. My brother drained over $300,000 from one of my personal trust accounts. They leased out my brownstone to some influencer couple who posted videos from my bedroom. Everything I had built, loved, earned, they turned it into their playground. I began gathering everything. Emails my mother sent to her attorney, falsely claiming I was suicidal. Bank withdrawals with my forged signature. Photos from the facility showing signs of medical negligence. I documented everything. Every scar. Every lie. And then I did the unthinkable, I went public. It started with an open letter I posted anonymously on a survivor's blog. I didn't name names. Not yet. But I detailed my story. I laid it bare. How I was institutionalized against my will, how my family hijacked my assets, how I was silenced with medication and paperwork. The post went viral. Women messaged me from all over the country. Some were survivors of the same system. Others were warning me. Some had seen my mother and brother hosting charity galas in my name, pretending I was too sick to attend. Pretending to be loving caretakers while living off my legacy. The rage inside me burned hotter than it ever had. And then, a mistake on their part cracked everything open. My mother filed for permanent conservatorship, expecting me to be too fragile to fight it. She walked into that courtroom in pearls and crocodile tears. My brother held her hand. They looked so polished, so prepared. And then I walked in. Alive. Stronger than they remembered. Hair cut sharp. Suit tailored. Voice clear. The courtroom fell silent. I watched my mother's face morph into shock. My brother looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I spoke, slowly, carefully, with evidence and composure. My lawyer laid out every forged signature. Every unauthorized transaction. Every medical discrepancy. Every photo. Every lie. They were cornered. But the real moment that broke them wasn't in the evidence. It was when the judge looked me in the eye and said, "Miss Kingsley, I owe you an apology from the system." My mother tried to object. But I stood up, turned to her, and calmly said, "You stole my freedom. Now watch me take everything back." You'd think after humiliating them in court, after having the judge revoke the conservatorship, and after reclaiming my accounts and properties, I'd feel satisfied. But this wasn't just about money or real estate anymore. It was about justice. It was about truth. And I wasn't done digging. My forensic accountant uncovered a trust fund I didn't even know existed. One created by my grandmother meant exclusively for me. It had clauses. I could only access it when I turned 30, or if I got married. But here's the kicker. That trust had been activated while I was institutionalized. And the funds? Gone. Over $1.2 million siphoned through a shell foundation my brother created, falsely posing as a mental health charity. They used my name as the face of it. Ran campaigns. Got sympathy donations. And pocketed the cash. I felt sick. Not just because they robbed me, but because they used my suffering to build their brand. My mother gave TV interviews about caring for her fragile daughter. My brother launched a podcast on resilience. They exploited me from every angle. Even my trauma became their trophy. But they made one fatal mistake. They got comfortable. They never imagined I'd fight back publicly. So I went further. I contacted every donor to the fake foundation and exposed the fraud. I sent each of them the forensic reports and screenshots of where their donations actually went. Luxury vacations, designer clothes, private school tuition for my brother's kids. One of the donors happened to be a well-known investigative journalist. He ran the story. Front page. National news. The headline: Daughter institutionalized by family in wealth scheme, escapes and exposes their lies. Overnight, the world saw them for who they truly were. My mother tried to spin it. Claimed I was unstable again. Said I was relapsing. But this time I had receipts. Video clips. Audio files. Voicemails. And a growing support system that refused to let me be silenced again. They lost everything. Their reputations. Their careers. And soon, their freedom. Because the district attorney launched a full investigation into their financial crimes. Charges were filed: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. But the real twist came in court during the criminal trial. While reviewing evidence, prosecutors uncovered something chilling. They hadn't acted alone. The psychiatrist who signed the initial documents for my involuntary hold? He was on my family's payroll. Not only was he seeing kickbacks, he had a history of misdiagnosing women from affluent families, always when money was involved. My case opened the floodgates. Other victims came forward. The doctor was arrested. His license revoked. And my case became a landmark lawsuit on mental health abuse and financial exploitation. What my family thought would be a quiet erasure turned into a national reckoning. I didn't expect peace to feel so unfamiliar. For so long my life had been a battlefield. My mind, my name, my reality constantly under siege. Now, with the lies exposed, the lawsuits behind me, and my family either behind bars or bankrupt from legal fees, I stood in the wreckage of everything they tried to build with my pain. And yet I wasn't broken. I was reborn. The court awarded me full restitution, not just my frozen accounts and stolen properties, but damages for emotional and psychological abuse. I donated part of it to mental health advocacy organizations, especially those focused on protecting people from wrongful institutionalization. But I wanted to do more than donate. I wanted to be heard. So I told my story. On podcasts. At women's shelters. In courtrooms. In universities. I talked about what it meant to have your sanity questioned by the people who were supposed to protect you. I talked about gaslighting, guardianship abuse, and how "she's just emotional" is too often weaponized against women. People listened. They cried. They stood. They shared their own stories. And slowly I became more than a victim. I became a voice. I even wrote a book. They called me crazy. A memoir about the fight for my truth. It became a bestseller not because it was perfectly written, but because it was raw, honest, and painfully familiar to too many. I wasn't alone. And I never had been. The redemption wasn't just in the revenge, though watching my abusers fall was admittedly satisfying. The real healing came when I looked in the mirror and saw me again. No longer sedated. No longer doubting myself. No longer begging to be believed. Just Amanda. Whole. Wiser. Free. One afternoon I stood at the gates of the private facility they once locked me in. Not as a patient but as a speaker invited to talk to the staff about ethical reform. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked past the nurses who once whispered about my episodes. Past the walls that once closed in on me. And into the room where I used to feel invisible. Only this time, every eye in the room was on me. And every voice was silent, waiting to hear mine. As I wrapped up my speech, I looked into the faces of the professionals. Some ashamed, some defensive, and a few genuinely moved. I wasn't there for revenge anymore. I was there for reckoning. For all the voices that had been silenced in places like this, I wanted mine to be the one that refused to go quiet. Just as I turned to leave, a young nurse approached me. Her eyes welled up with tears. "I believed you," she whispered. "Back then. I knew something was wrong with how they brought you in, but I was too new to speak up." I simply nodded. Next time, speak. Because that's how change begins. Not in courts or bestsellers, but in whispers that grow into courage. And just when I thought the dust had settled, life offered me one more twist. A week later, I received a letter. From my cousin Emily. It was a confession. She had known about everything. The fake diagnoses. The manipulated doctors. The bank accounts in her name. She'd helped them. Out of greed. Out of fear. Out of the twisted belief that I didn't need all that money, that they deserved it more than I did. But the letter didn't end there. Emily had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. And in her final months she wanted to tell the truth. To help me heal. To face the consequences. I didn't know whether to feel rage or relief. So I did the only thing I knew how to do now. I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. I deserved peace. I deserved freedom from their poison. I deserved to walk away without carrying the weight of their sins on my back. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was my final act of power. So now here I am, alive, standing in the ruins of their betrayal, building something far stronger than they ever imagined I could. Because when your own blood tries to drown you and you still rise, you don't just survive, you soar. If you've ever been gaslit, silenced, or betrayed by the people who should have protected you, know this. Your truth is your power. And no one, not even family, has the right to take that away. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Let someone else know they're not alone. And if you've got a story of your own, this is your sign to tell it. Because every time we speak, we break a little more of the silence that holds people hostage. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're just beginning. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories of betrayal, survival, and taking your power back. Because your voice, it matters.